Good morning. Who would you choose for a basketball, football, soccer, baseball team? What about track or swim or a gymnastics team? Does their physique play any role in the position that they would play in a given sport, whatever that sport may be? Not all businessmen make good laborers, and not all good laborers make good businessmen. Would you have a high degree of respect for a Navy SEAL and the vetting process that they go through? You know, there are oftentimes personality traits associated with given occupations also, not only physiques, in a given profession. I mean, you got to be a pretty stout person to be a bricklayer. That's a little bit different than the computer engineer. But even personalities in such occupations as engineers or the arts or a lawyer or a teacher, and the list goes on, can certainly contribute to the choosing of that given occupation. What about the kingdom of Jesus Christ? Now, it's for anyone and everyone, certainly, but are there different personalities and different abilities, and we might even say different physiques, but we'll kind of key in on that thought here in just a moment, a little bit further. Is it not true that man oftentimes looks on the outside, but God the inside? Physical strength. I just wonder what Abraham looked like. Now, the average height of an Israelite, they say, was about 5'5". That was the average. But I picture, the father of the Hebrews, Abraham is 6'4", broad shoulder, could take care of business. That's just what I have in my mind. What about Samson? What about Joshua? I view Joshua as just an average guy, such as myself, literally 5'9". I'm just average. That's all right. What about David? I kind of view David as a little peepsqueak, but, he can still get the job done, you might say. He wasn't, the big, strong guy. Did their physical appearance really make any difference? I would say not. I really don't see Samson necessarily as this, big old muscular guy. I think that his strength was a kind of a surprise to a lot of people. So what about Paul? Over in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 7, do you look at things according to the outward appearance? He goes on to say, if anyone is convinced in himself that he is Christ, let him again consider this in himself, that just as he is Christ, that is, like that Christ possesses him, even so we are Christ. He says, you look at the outward appearance, but that's not what God is focused on. Now, doing a little research in regard to Paul specifically, there is a book that is titled Acts of Paul and Thecla. It was written by a 2nd century church leader, and it coincides with some of the early Christian paintings that we actually have of the Apostle Paul. I decided not to share that with you. You can go and look it up for yourself. But let me give you what is described in this book concerning the appearance of the Apostle Paul. Paul is described as a man small in stature. You know that's what Paul means, is small. With a bald head and crooked legs, in a good state of body, with eyebrows meeting, and a nose somewhat hooked. It was described in another writing that his eyebrow, his unibrow, was like a dead caterpillar on his forehead. So I see a big old bushy eyebrow going all the way across, and a hooked nose, a nose at the end where it turns down like a witch, bald-headed, bow-legged. I don't think you'd be choosing him for your soccer team. In fact, in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 10, Paul says of himself, he's saying that this is what they're saying about him. For his letters they say are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible. And in fact, in regard to his speech, or his lack of eloquence, one may put it, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, and I, brethren, when I came to you, did not come with excellence of speech, or of wisdom declaring to you the testimony of God. For I determined not to know anything among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. I was with you in weakness, in fear, and in much trembling. I don't know if that's because of the bowed legs. I'm thinking not. I'm thinking that he was scared to death to proclaim the gospel and to do it in the right manner. But that's how he was viewed, for sure. And my speech and my preaching were not with persuasive words of human wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not be in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. We have members of the church today that have preacheritis. And what I mean by preacheritis is that idea that no matter what he says, it's got to be the truth. And they put all their confidence in him. And we know that those in Berea were more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica because they put Paul to the test. An apostle. But they were going to make sure what he said was the truth. But it wasn't his outward appearance that convinced them. He wasn't the blonde-haired, blue-eyed individual, straight white teeth, that caused them to hang on every word. What about David? Certainly he is a man after God's own heart. In 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 7, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, whether he's tall or short in that sense, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Of course, he has to go through all the sons and finally has to ask, is there another? Oh yeah, I've got another son, David, who's caring for the sheep out in the field. Well, bring him. He's the one. What about Gideon? In Judges chapter 6 and verse 11, now the angel of the Lord came and sat under a terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed the wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. Now I want you to notice how this angel of the Lord addresses Gideon. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. Dropping down to verse 14. Then the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? So he said to him, now this is his view of himself. This is Gideon speaking on behalf of who he is, if you will. "Oh, my Lord, how can I save Israel? Who am I? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least of my father's house." I'm a nobody, in other words. I don't even come from a somebody. And the Lord said to him, "Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man." Great story, isn't it? You think of Moses. Moses pretty much objects to God choosing him as a leader to go back to Egypt to deliver the Israelites. In fact, he finally reaches the point where he says, "Just go choose someone else." And God, in his frustration, says, "Here comes your brother Aaron, and you will be like a god to him, and he will be a prophet to you." There are all too often times we cut ourselves short of what we are able to do in the Lord. Because do we view our outward appearance? Probably not. But part of that equation is that, who am I? I'm a nobody. I'm no one special. But maybe we might fit a little bit more in the category of Peter. Now, to set the stage in regard to what we'll read here in just a moment in John chapter 21, please understand that this is a man who has been with Jesus. He's one of the first that is chosen, and he is a devout follower of Jesus Christ. In fact, he would claim that he's left everything and everyone to follow Jesus. There comes at this point in time, the night before, in which Jesus is betrayed, the night before he's going to be hung on a cross, that is expressed. And Peter says, "No way, no how," right? He's very adamant that I will die for you. You are not going to die. Get behind me, Satan. Jesus rebukes him. Now, sandwiched between that and that's the one slice of bread. The other slice of bread is that he stands upon, well, I don't know if he's standing on anything, but he's definitely standing out. And he speaks what we would consider the first gospel sermon of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And he unlocks the door for some 3,000 souls to come into the kingdom. We see him very vehement about not denying the Lord and then denying him 3 times. And his strength, you might say, to proclaim the gospel. Sandwiched between that, we come across John chapter 21. Jesus has died, been buried, he's resurrected. He has not yet ascended to the Father, but soon he will. And he has a short little conversation with Peter here on this occasion. We won't look at all of it, but beginning in verse 15. "So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these?'" And I would venture to say that he's referring to the other apostles. I'm not certain. But it would seem, if not the other apostles, those who were there that morning. And I'm not going to deal with the love. You know, there's a difference in the words love here. But Peter responds, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." This is a guy that days before, a few weeks, denied him when he said he wouldn't. Verse 16, he said to him again a second time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he had said to him a third time. It's not that he said it the third time, but now he's using the Greek word that Peter had been using all along. "Do you love me?" Do you really? You love me as a friend? A close friend? He said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. My question to you is that if one of us was caught or confessed that they were an adulterer, they confessed that they were a liar about whatever it is. If they confessed that they were a murderer, how long would we put them on probation? How quickly would we put them back into a leadership role? I can ask that question honestly because I've had to deal with it. As a preacher and evangelist at a particular congregation, we had elders, but one of our members did kill someone. And I can speak from experience how he was treated. And I was extremely disappointed in a lot of Christians, especially the eldership. We're talking weeks at the most. I mean, it was 50 days between his resurrection and Pentecost. Penta, 50. So, at the most, it's not years, is the point. So, what did Jesus want him to do? Peter, you need to go and be quiet. Peter, you need to go and pray a whole lot. Peter, you're just not going to be able to be used in the service of the Lord until we feel you are worthy. Now, of course, Jesus knew his heart, but still, Peter had to also forgive himself and move on. In fact, after each question, do you love me? He makes the statement, he says, feed my lambs. He's going into a leadership role. Tend my sheep. And then feed my sheep. That's a big responsibility, to tend and to feed. And it's what shepherds do. I wonder how many individuals are stuck with the guilt of whatever sin it is in the past, which was probably years ago, that keeps them from going into the eldership, into a leadership role. I'll guarantee you, when I mess up leading singing, I don't ever want to get up again. It's just so embarrassing and so on and so forth. And I just want to crawl underneath a rock and please don't say anything. Much less if you were to sin a great sin. Is there a greater sin than to deny the Lord? But that's what Peter did. And it wasn't too long after that, 2.5 months max, Jesus saying, it's time to get back in the saddle, if you will, to get back at doing what you need to do. Lead. You see, because there is strength in wisdom. Hopefully we learn from our mistakes, right? First, not to ever repeat them. But second, to help others. In Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7, Proverbs 1 and verse 7, I don't have any of the scriptures up there, but we're going to just go through them very quickly. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So if you're a wise individual, you've made your mistakes, you've learned from them, you've learned from others, you've gained wisdom, you've gained instruction, then it needs to be put into practice. And it's not to be kept to yourself and just for your life, but also for the lives of others. In Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 22, a wise man scales the city of the mighty and brings down the trusted stronghold. I just love that. This is the guy who, if you will, he looks at a map of a city, he finds its weak point, he goes and he penetrates it, and he brings down the whole city because of his wisdom. It wasn't because of his strength. He's nothing special. He's not the big mighty man. He's using his noggin. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 15. Now there was found in it, talking about a city, a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Now the end of that verse says, and he was forgotten. And that's kind of the point, but he delivered the city by his wisdom. Could you deliver a congregation by your wisdom? Absolutely. In Psalm 147, verses 10 and 11, he does not delight in the strength of the horse, referring to God. He takes no pleasure in the legs of men. The Lord takes pleasure in those who fear him and those who hope in his mercy. God's not going to look at you and go, because he's broad-shouldered, thick-legged, soft heart. Maybe the soft heart part, huh? We can't be bulls in the china cabinet. The idea that we go in there and bull rush. Have you ever seen that? Person's going to get his way. The battle we fight is spiritual. It's not physical. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 52. But Jesus said to him, put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. And of course, this is after he's already cut off Malchus's ear. And who is this? Peter. Who's going to deny him hours later? In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning in verse 3, y'all are very familiar with this passage. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ and being ready to punish all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. We need leaders who know God's word and who can defend it, is the point. And so what I'd like to do is consider the qualities that all of us should possess, especially that of leaders. The first is I would like to consider Joshua. So if you will turn over to Joshua chapter 1, we'll be looking at 4 verses there. In Joshua chapter 1 and verse 6, we've got to be strong and courageous. That means we have to stand up. Be strong and of good courage. Now, I know that they were going to fight a physical battle, but making the spiritual application, be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Be strong and of good courage. And I don't think he was talking about physical strength. Secondly, be disciplined. In verse 7, only be strong, there it is again, and very courageous. God adds to it, that you may observe. You see, sometimes the hardest part is the self-discipline to do what we need to do to prepare ourselves for the battle. And that's why we got to start working with the 5-year-olds, that they'll grow up preparing themselves and gaining knowledge and gaining wisdom to go and fight, to be valiant, to stand for the truth. And so that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses, my servant, commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. So you got to be strong, very courageous. You have to be self-disciplined. Third, you have to obey. You have to obey the commands. Joshua chapter 1 verse 8. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night. So even in this context, we can pull from this that it's not all physical of them actually pulling out a literal sword and going and fighting a battle against the Canaanites. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. So we need men and women. And I'm really, today one of the catchphrases is influencer, whether that's on Twitter, Facebook, or what have you. We're all influencers to a certain degree. If there was someone sitting over here minding their own business, sitting in the corner, not saying a word, guess what? It's going to have an influence. We cannot be an island to ourselves. We influence people. So I am including anyone and everyone, but primarily really wanting to focus my attention on, elders and deacons and song leaders. They're leaders. Those who are saying prayers. All of this is important. And teachers who are leading a class. But more than anything I would be emphasizing, of course, is an eldership. It's not just making good business decisions. In fact, my take on that is that's left to the deacons. Elders may approve it, you might say, kind of put their stamp of approval, but they're not the ones. They have too much concern in tending and feeding the flock, is the point. That's what's really, really important. The spiritual welfare of the congregation. And then fourth, what we see in this instruction from God in order for Joshua to be a good leader, a successful leader, is to trust Him. Joshua chapter 1 and verse 9, have I not commanded you? Here it is again. Be strong and of good courage. 3 out of 4. I think he's really saying this to get the point across, right? Do not be afraid. Are there any in the Lord's church today that are scared? Scared of the opposition, scared of the responsibility, scared of the time that it's going to require? Are they scared of the obligations, the accountability? It doesn't take away from the fact that if God has given you that ability and the responsibility, and you go, well, I don't know that God's done that. And I would say that all of us should be working towards that end. Because that's just what we should be. Qualities we should all possess, especially those of leaders. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, discouraged. It's going to be a tough work, Joshua. It's not easy. You're not going to just be barking out orders. You're going to be in the thick of it. So are elders. But do we have men in the church, and I'm saying the universal church today, who are just not willing to pay the price? They're afraid, dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. See, do we trust in God? Is He going to help us fight the battles, in other words? Or do we feel all alone? Do we feel all alone? I've left the title off intentionally, which you've already probably read on the sign and saw on the slides earlier. There is no I in team. And of course, you got these smart alecks who are going to say, but there's a me, right? Okay. A former Navy SEAL was asked, who makes it through? You're all familiar. Who doesn't ring the bell and get their donut? He responded, I can't tell you who gets through, but I can tell you who doesn't get through. The star college athletes that have never really been tested to their inner core, they don't make it. The supreme leaders who like to delegate everything, none of them make it. The big tough guys with the huge muscles and the tattoos that have everything to prove to everyone how tough they are, they don't make it. Listen very carefully. This is his words. Some of the guys who make it through are skinny and scrawny. That's why Samson, didn't have to be the big old muscle guy, nor David, nor Abraham. But this is a physical thing. We understand that. This is a physical, but more mental. But he says some of the guys who make it through are skinny and scrawny. Some of the guys who make it through, you will see them shivering out of fear. Listen carefully. But every single one of them who makes it through, when they're emotionally exhausted and they're physically exhausted some way, somehow, they're able to dig deep down in themselves and find the energy and the wisdom to help the person next to them. I want you to wrap your mind around that. It's not about him. It's about them. Service. I'm continuing to quote. Service, giving to the other, having their back is what makes the highest performing teams, SEAL teams, in the world. Not their strength, not their intelligence. It is their willingness to be there for each other. I know there are qualifications, and we can deal with those sometime. The point is are we servants or not? Do we care about the other? If we ever have elders in this congregation, it's not going to be about them. It's still going to be about us. Us serving the Lord and in the process serving one another. It's not for the acclamates. It's not for the title. It's not for the recognition. It's about serving others. So when we choose not to go to a particular Bible class, when we choose not to do some kind of activity that will be a betterment for the kingdom, when we make these choices in our daily lives, what we're doing is we're actually withholding service to one another. It's not about me. And we could all say it together. I'm not asking you to. I'm just saying it's not about me. Look across the aisle. Y'all, look over there. Do we love one another or not? It's service. And the best that we can be is the kind of people who serve each other. And you know Matthew chapter 25. That you fed me when I was hungry. You gave me drink when I was thirsty. You visited me in prison and in the hospital when I was sick. When did we ever have an opportunity to do that? When you've done it to the least of these, my brethren, you've done it to me. It may be a lofty goal for us, but it's got to be a goal. That we work together to be a church, a congregation that God expects us to be. And ultimately, it's going to take a lot of strength, a lot of fortitude, a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom. It's going to take a lot of tenacity and get the job done. No matter what. Even if you died as a SEAL in an operation, you don't leave any man behind. They're dead, but you don't leave them behind. If we could have that kind of attitude and that kind of determination, that kind of love for one another, what can we accomplish while we're still alive? We need to work on it. There's no I in team. If we can help you in any way, won't you come as we